Hello, Laura. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's brilliant to see you in your forest. For those of you who can see you on screen, can see the video, you've got a lovely forest.
A lot of snow in my forest today in Cheltenham because we've had a massive dump this weekend. Yes. So imagine a snowy forest, a bit like Game of Thrones, but slightly less harrowing.
A lovely winter wonderland.
Yes.
Very lovely. Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be talking to you today because I know that you have a really exciting story to tell, and genuinely you are one of the most inspiring people I know. So when I was thinking about doing these interviews for this podcast, your name came up in flashing lights in my head, because you've done a TED Talk, which I'm sure you'll talk about as well, which moved me to tears, and genuinely I think
it moved me to tears as well. If you've seen it, not to or anything, but
you made everybody cry for all the best reasons. So yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time for joining me today. So we first met about 4 years ago, and at the time you were a strategy director for a smallish business, but working with very big names. Would you mind telling us a little bit about what you were doing, and then ultimately what led to the change in your career?
Absolutely. So I was strategy director at the Innovation Beehive, and they worked with all sorts of interesting clients across FMCG and retail and pharma and, oh my gosh, all sorts of professional services and different sectors of society. And actually we met in the Growth Hub in Cirencester, which is one of the most sustainable buildings, I suspect, in Gloucestershire. Probably part of what attracted me like a moth to a flame. It's a really amazing space, and it's an innovation hub, so lots of other small business owners there. We certainly really appreciated having other people on the journey who were trying to innovate locally, and most of our work was probably national or international. So, you know, we'd be working on Money 2020, looking at conferences for how transactions happen online. We'd be working with McDonald's on their people strategy and on how they connect people on the front line in a high stress position with the board level exec, and make sure there's a voice kind of flowing up and down. So a lot of culture change, a lot of transformation, organizational transformation, and then innovation around product, services and business models flowing out of it. And yeah, I was working with the amazing innovator Mock O'Keefe, who's like an author, and he had this brilliant relationship with Google where he would go and do speeches quarterly to C-suite execs, and it was just phenomenal. I mean, he's a brilliant brain on culture change anyway, but I'd never been inside any of Google, so Google being, you know, quite iconic, it was pretty cool to go and see them from the inside and talk to some of the guys working there around what their challenges were, and sort of compare notes and meet some really interesting people. So yeah.
Proper juicy project, huh?
Yeah, well, yeah, that was just a kind of a venue space they very kindly let us sort of moonlight in. But I know Mock had a long-standing relationship with them, and with the lady that ran that space, had been her coach for many years. So yeah, lots of interesting and systemic, kind of quite complex innovation challenges to solve. So businesses going through a lot of turbulent change, and often with lots of different affiliates all around the world, lots of different cultural nuances. So as with all innovation, 50% of it was about people, was about the human process. And I guess I've always loved innovating and trying to understand what makes people tick and understand behaviour change, particularly positive behaviour change. And that connects back into things like purpose and vision. So it sort of worked really well. My brain was more organizational transformation and strategy, and, you know, all of that design part, human-centered design. And then I guess Mock brought that brilliant side around cultural change and how you manage from C-suite to creating the conditions for that to not just be a great idea, but actually see the light of day in the real world as an innovation. Otherwise, it's just a lovely idea, really, isn't it? It's not innovation if it never actually happens. It's just
quite
a beautiful conversation. Want to get it out there, birth it into the real world.
But look at you. I mean, we know that you've moved on since that role. And you still talk about that role with so much passion. It was clearly something that you really enjoyed doing, and you were really immersed in it, if you like. So what happened? Can you talk us through what this, the big career change was, and how it all came about?
Well, COVID, by and large, a small business and with big clients, but one of our biggest clients worked in the aviation sector, was literally grounded by COVID just as we were about to launch a massive project. So I went on furlough, was homeschooling my kids, and McDonald's sort of, had to do whatever they had to do to sort of batten down the hatches and protect their business. So all of a sudden our pipeline of work became very, very thin, and we had a large number of very senior people and not enough workflow to come through. And I'd worked for myself before, I'd known Mark a long time, and it became quickly obvious to me that you can't, it wasn't going to carry on. You couldn't pay for all these people when there wasn't the workflow to come, and it was really unclear what would happen next. So I guess I had this time where I wasn't totally twiddling my thumbs. I was trying to homeschool my 8 and 3-year-old, which was new and different. And it was also the hottest summer on record. I don't know if you remember back to 2019, and it's like, absolutely scorching summer. So I just found myself sort of slightly giving up sometimes on the screen time schooling and just taking the kids out into the woods. We're very lucky in Cheltenham to have woods a little bit like what's behind me on the doorstep. I don't think we realised the extent of the woodland that sits around us until COVID. So we were going out. That was the only place I could find shade. And I've probably always known since I was a kid that it's just really calming and really restorative to be in nature. So when the kids were feeling a bit disconnected or a bit, missing their friends, we could be out in nature. There'd be other people at a safe distance that you could sort of interact with. And you had the whole of the shadow and the shade and the loveliness of nature to sort of pass the time. And I was really appreciative of it. That's a bit of a long answer to a short question. So there was a turning point, and I suppose I recognised that I was going to get made redundant. Well, we talked about it, and that was the obvious choice. And I've been doing some freelance work because I wasn't allowed to get paid work while I was furloughed with a brilliant agency called United Edge. They do social and environmental justice, and they were based out of Indonesia, and they wanted to move it online because of COVID for them as well. So they had this amazing group of about 250 people, largely from the majority South, so sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, Pacific Island nations, and we would be talking about the development sector and how to innovate and improve what they were doing. And one day we're on a little breakout group, and everyone's sort of politely introducing themselves, going, I help with hurricane relief in the Pacific Island nations, and I help prevent human trafficking of children in Siem Reap in Cambodia. What do you do, Laura? And I was like, sort of perpetuate the growth of Western capitalist brands. And I was thinking in my head, compared to all the people that I'm meeting on this call, not enough. It was like the headline. And we spent 6 weeks, we'd meet every week to kind of move through the modules that they devised of the online course that we created. And it very quickly became obvious that a lot of the work they were doing around hurricane crisis relief and drought, managing micro enterprises, were as a result of the climate change.
Yeah.
And actually climate change was being caused by things that I'd been doing on a daily basis without even realizing it, in my privileged, westernized, minority North lifestyle. And I was horrified by it. It was a real kind of chastening moment for me that I was meeting people who were at the front edge of climate change, who had been suffering disproportionately for decades because of something not consciously that I'd done, but I guess my actions, my behaviors, my buying power, all of that had created this dynamic where I was creating suffering on the other side of the world, and I felt really bad about it. I was like, this is crazy. I've always been interested in sustainability, but I hadn't appreciated the injustice perhaps of what I was being confronted with. And I was like, I've got to find out about this. So I was like, reading every book I could lay my hand on, watching all the documentaries. Sir David Attenborough, yep, I'll have it. Johan Rockström, the world leading climate scientist, he clubbed together with David Attenborough during lockdown to make Breaking Boundaries, amazing Netflix documentary if you haven't seen it. And then I went back to university. I was like, I have to understand exactly what's gone wrong here and what I can do about it. And so I went back to Cambridge to the Institute for Sustainable Leadership, thought, I'm going to understand the science, and then I'm going to understand the solutions and figure out what I can do to sort this out, or to do something positive here, because the message that I'm getting loud and clear is this is going to have a knock-on effect to my children, and it's already had a knock-on effect to millions of children in other parts of the world, even if I wasn't perhaps as aware as I could have been around all of it. So yeah, that's kind of, lockdown was an interesting time, and I had, I suppose, the privilege of being furloughed by my former employers, the time and the headspace then, really think about my purpose and think, I'm not okay about this, actually. This isn't okay. Now that I understand this, and it's not a judgment on other people, it's a kind of, with this knowledge, I want to act, I want to use all that knowledge. There must be something from these 20 years of working in innovation that can plug into an understanding of the science and the solutions that can create a bit of a ripple effect here, that can build some momentum and get some positive change going. Because I think if other people understood the size of the problem, and that they could actually do something about it, we're really clear on the solutions, they go, yeah, great, tell me more.
But and this is what I love about you, Laura, that I think we all know that what the challenges are in the world, yet so few of us are actually doing something to make a difference, and maybe we're all making small changes in our own little way, but I think a lot of us still feel like there could be more that we could do. And I just love that you've taken it to the complete extreme. I don't know if you want to share with people what you did with your life savings, for example.
Well, so when I went to study at Cambridge, which again, it's part of my privilege, I had a little bit of money to invest in doing this 8-week course, which I'm now an assessor on. It's a brilliant course if you ever want to understand about climate change. So our COP26 was coming up. I did it in the summer, and then we had COP26 coming up a year later. And with some of the people that I'd met there, we were trying to work out how to help small businesses. And one of the things that became quickly obvious is that there wasn't a lot of policy or subsidies or grants or tax breaks for small businesses. It was all pointed at big business. And we almost wanted to go to COP26 and do this art installation with like 100 cardboard boxes, and one of them coloured in bright yellow, like neon yellow, going, only 1% is getting all the goodies, right? This is madness. If we want to transform our society, we can't be just focusing on big business, because 99% of people in employment in the UK are working for a small or medium-sized enterprise. What about those guys? And their pathways are much quicker and simpler. We should absolutely be blowing wind in their sails and enabling them, creating the infrastructure, giving them funding so they can get their net zero pathways off the ground. And it wasn't happening. So I sort of was debating different routes into how to do something to do with education or whatever. But for COP26, I had decided I wanted to be part of a group of ambitious small businesses who are trying to each plant 1 million trees by 2030. They're called the Million Tree Pledge. And I'm really small, like I'm a one-woman band. I just went back to running my own consultancy, which I'd done a decade previously. I was made redundant at the beginning of the 2008 recession. So I suppose I'd had a pattern of being given that choice between immediately getting another job or going solo, and decided to go solo just to see if I could make it. And I'd been working in London for quite a prestigious innovation agency there, which is where I met Mock from the Beehive. So that had worked out because a big client had followed me, and I'd been able to get enough work to sort of get over the hump of imposter syndrome and fear of failure to go on my own. So I knew I could do it. But I took my life savings to put into the Million Tree Pledge, and my pledge to them was, I don't know if I'll have the assets to be able to plant 1 million trees with just me, but I'm pretty sure I can find 9 other ambitious small business owners to collaborate with me to make this happen. So can you let me join on that basis? We'll have a collaborative forest. We will just invite other small and micro businesses in, because probably a lot of them feel like a drop in the ocean, like them planting trees, but the amount of money that they'd have to devote towards that isn't going to be enough to plant 1 million. But together, we could probably thunderclap and do it. And COP26, this brilliant moment. So we went up to the Net Zero Festival. It was part of the Fringe Festival at COP26. If you went to COP26, it was like Fort Knox. I mean, you had to walk or ride for 3 miles to get into the only bridge across in Glasgow that would allow you access to the green zone, which was full of BP and SSE telling you about how amazing they were. I mean, it didn't brilliantly work for me on a business level, but the Fringe Festival did. That was full of what appeared to be all the small businesses who'd been trying to get into the main show but couldn't. We're having a really interesting debate. So they said, right, Million Tree Pledge, you can have a table and a pop-up banner. And I was like, we're the Million Tree Pledge. That we can't be having tables and banners made out of, you know, plastics and all of that. We've got to do something more imaginative. So why don't we do like a giant zero? And we use this story of the hummingbird, the smallest bird in the forest, which is from a brilliant allegory by Wangari Maathai, who's a humanitarian activist from Kenya, who's now passed away sadly, but she tells this brilliant allegory. Please YouTube, Google it afterwards if you haven't seen it, that my friend saw in assembly with his 7-year-old kids. Were doing it as their assembly that day, and you know, the forest's on fire, all the animals come out of the forest and they've got tears in their eyes because their home's going up in flames, and Hippo hears this tiny buzzing movement sort of going back and forth to the fire, to the little river, to the fire, to the little river, and he sort of pauses for a second. He goes, Hummingbird, you're not trying to put the fire out, are you, with that tiny drop of water in your beak? And Hummingbird squares up to him and he goes, well, Hippo, if you filled your giant jaws with water, and Elephant, if you filled the gallons of water that your trunk can hold, and Pelican, if you filled your enormous beak, and we all put it on the fire, then maybe, just maybe, it would be enough to put it out. And all the animals turn around and they go back to the river. So I love this idea. And it was just so, you know, children get it. Okay, I go into primary schools all the time. They have no trouble understanding when you explain climate change. I don't make children eco-anxious, but when you give them the principles of how the atmosphere is heating up, they get it, they want to act on it. You can give them lots of positive things you can point them towards. So we thought, well, how can we make that an art installation? And I've been on a retreat. I'd driven by electric vehicle to Italy. That was a journey and a half, 1,000 miles each way in a MG, almost ran out of electricity, but didn't. So it is possible. I've got fed up of people saying, oh, I can't get an EV because I work in Bristol. And, you know, I'm not sure I'll get there and back. I'm like, I'm going to drive to Italy 1,000 kilometers to prove that you can go range in EVs. You just need to plan a little bit. Anyway, that's another story. So we get there. On my retreat, I'd met an amazing artist who'd broken a hip and for whatever reason had been in hospital folding peace cranes, and had folded 1,000 peace cranes. And I was like, that's amazing. And she showed me what she'd done with the displays. Someone had displayed them in this kind of monastery in Italy, and it just looked amazing. And I was like, wow, what could we do with that? And then my cousin sent me this photo. She's used to be a costumier at the Royal Opera House in Paris. Wow. And this artist had taken, like, I don't know if it was fish wire or something invisible, and with tiny dots of wax had glued feathers onto it in this beautiful zero. And I was like, wow, it's like a giant zero, like net zero. We could do something with that. What if we used fish wire so it looked like they're flying in midair, and we just folded loads and loads of these hummingbirds, and they all had sustainably printed logos of the small businesses from all around the UK, like this brilliant action. So that's what we did. We got all these businesses from all over the place who couldn't go but wanted a presence, and we printed with Tewkesbury printers, brilliant sustainable printers if you ever need one, helped us print them, and Culpeper and Company did the artwork, thanks to them. God, you see, it was such a lovely collaboration. We had to put all these small businesses to make it happen. Then we talked to all the guys that ran the I don't know what you call them, like the little plantarium shops in Glasgow and the little nurseries, to find a tree. So we had little messages with some of the facts about how many, we've cut down 3 trillion trees in our lifetime, and we need to restore 2 trillion trees back into the ground to draw down existing carbon emissions, and some of the brilliant stats that David Attenborough shares. So we'd sort of pegged these from little, they hired us plants for the day. So we created a little mini forest. We had our giant zero of hummingbirds, and then we had this little trestle table, and bless them, the brewery where we did it sort of went from, you can have a tiny corner sort of to one side, to, wow, this sounds really creative, why don't you be at the entrance? So when people came into the Fringe Festival, they just sat down and folded hummingbirds with us. I'm like, what's the origami about? I'm like, oh, it's about this story about, you know, the hummingbird. So instead of ramming climate change down people's throats, I've always been interested in, how can you be more creative and imaginative about it? You know, no one needs to be made to feel more guilty or burdened by it. how can you tell a different story that's about the solution and about the collaboration and about not feeling disempowered and helpless and like a drop in the ocean, but being like that little hummingbird who goes, I don't care how small I am in the forest, I can do, if everyone did the maximum they could do, we've got this. And what's the alternative? Even if I'm wrong, we create a world with cleaner air, with more shared prosperity across our communities, with better agriculture that's restored our soils. There's just so much love, more circular economies where we don't throw as much waste away and have such an impact on our biodiversity. So there's so many positives. It's like that little cartoon.
There's no downside here, is there?
I mean, even if we're wrong, we just make the world a better place.
Absolutely.
For future generations.
Absolutely.
And so, I don't know how you see purpose connecting into the legacy that you leave, but it does somehow for me.
Yeah, well, you're going to leave one hell of a legacy, Laura. Can you tell us what it is you do now?
Well, so how do I describe what I do now? I'm sort of halfway between a climate consultant and a climate coach. I don't work one-to-one with businesses anymore, but what I'm so part of my time I am educating other small businesses. So I'm a co-facilitator on Clean Growth UK's Net Zero 360 course. So that is working with Brighton University's free carbon calculator. They've this year built a carbon calculator tool specifically for SMEs, and up until now you've had to pay £1,000–3,000 to get a carbon footprint analyst to go away, ask you a load of questions, come up with your footprint, share it back, and then a bit like an accounting process, every year you would get your annual
It's a very complex process, isn't it? So I have spoken to somebody about this, and it used to be complex, I think.
Well, it is relatively complex, but I don't think filling in a calculator tool is, so they built a tool that to fill in is relatively simple. I'd say that's 20% of the work. To get the data to fill in the tool, that's 80% of the work. That's where you're having to go and talk to your supply chain and just go through things like your utility bills and your water bills. It's not difficult in itself. You've just not gone through the process of asking yourself those questions before. So we handhold businesses through that to say it's not actually that hard. It's just rewiring your brain a little bit to ask some different questions, but it is requiring headspace and resource. And it's creating transparency so they can see, okay, well, now I understand what my carbon footprint is. I didn't know that refrigeration, like F gases that we use in coolants and refrigeration, are 4,500 times to 100,000 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So if I've got loads of freezers going on in my small business, that's going to mean I've got a really big footprint. And if those freezers are leaking or really old and whatever, that's terrible. I could do something about that. So once we give people eyes on the problem, the solutions become almost like a no-brainer. And I really feel like the more we can educate as many businesses across the UK, and my mission is to get 1 million small businesses to net zero by 2025. So we need to motor next year. We've probably done about a few thousand. And we were just talking about it actually this morning, saying if we want to get to 1 million, we need to scale rapidly. We need to change what we're doing next year. I feel like we've prototyped a lot of what we want to say. Now we need to sort of find new ways of saying it. But that's brilliant, because then they're more resilient. They're more resilient to think about, okay, we've just had a dump of snow. How's that affected my supply chain? Well, all of a sudden my employees can't get into work, or my children are at home doing homeschooling, so I can't do all my calls quite as cleanly, or whatever it might be. We know that the climate is changing. We've seen that this summer. We've seen the floods, we've seen the increased storms, we've seen the extreme heat. I'm working with a load of local surgeries in Cheltenham who are trying to decarbonise primary care. Their freezers and fridges could barely keep up with the heat to keep the medication at the right temperature for them to use it. I mean, this is life or death stuff. If they don't have medication for cancer patients, it's very serious for the NHS. So we know that as a society, we have to transform and we have to get our heads around these new challenges. But the pathway to doing it is really, really clear. It's not that we don't understand how to do it. It's just that we're not doing it. We're going down business as usual. I think in many cases we're not quite uncomfortable enough yet, because government isn't mandating us, but that will come through. It's mandated for big business from this April, and that will trickle down through, because we're all part of someone else's supply chain over the next couple of years. So I feel like the low carbon economy will be as disruptive as the digital economy was. And I don't know if we remember how we didn't really think digital was going to be that big a deal. And then all of a sudden, we can see during COVID, it's been massive. But if you take ourselves back 15 years, digital and what it's done for us with big data and communication has been groundbreaking. And the low carbon economy will be groundbreaking, either because government policy guides it to be or because nature forces it to be. And I'm hoping it's going to be government policy. It's not moving quickly enough at the moment. And I think COP27 showed us business has to take a lead with the backing of private equity and the big finance banks. So
yeah, I think it's fair to say that you're not going to be twiddling your thumbs anytime soon. I think there's a hell of a lot of work to do. And I'm just so impressed that you're really spearheading the way for a lot of small businesses, and hopefully bigger businesses as well are going to be taking note of how change can happen. So I'm really, I just think what you're doing is absolutely brilliant. For anybody who's listening to this going, oh, it's all well and good for you because you had furlough and and you had time to think about what to do, what would your advice be for somebody who's perhaps in a role that isn't quite aligned with what they, with their values or things that they feel strongly about, and they're contemplating making that change, but don't feel they're quite ready yet? What would your advice be?
Whenever I've felt that I've got to those points, I've always tried to come back to purpose. And I've needed a bit of headspace to do it. So it has often been when I've had a holiday. We've got Christmas holidays on our doorstep. So I personally like to go out into nature when I'm troubled by things. I like to walk in nature. So maybe there's some place that feels tranquil or peaceful or somewhere that you can settle. And I would just encourage people to go out and really inquire into it. And sometimes I literally just sit down with like a big bit of A3. I mean, I'm a visual thinker, so I sketch it out, but I'll sketch out what are the points in my life where I felt connected to purpose, where I felt alive, or I felt really energized. I felt like I was on fire. I was happy. I was the best version of me. Yeah. And so I'll just draw it out. And maybe it's when I was a teenager, or maybe I did something when I was traveling, or maybe there was just a particular person that I worked with and it just worked brilliantly. So I'll kind of sketch out these, 10 moments on a page. It's funny because I did this with my husband. I have a picture of it on the wall next to me over here of what we did with him. And it's got like him trekking up the Annapurna Sanctuary in Nepal. And when he was 40, he did this amazing cookery experience at Hugh Fernley's place. But anyway, I think once you look at those things, then you sort of drill into the elements of, so what were the ingredients that made me feel alive? And energy for me is such a great compass guide to purpose. If there's something that makes your energy go up, you know that you're onto a winner. It's making you feel good and it's allowing you to feel your best self. What are the conditions that you need to be your best self? And equally, the shadow side of that is, what are the conditions that are constraining you or sucking your energy away, or not making you feel like you can be your best self? And it may be a personality dynamic, or it may just be the amount of time that you have to do different things. I'm somebody who gets bored quite easily, so I like project work. I like being a consultant because you constantly change what you do. I remember I worked at W.H. Smith's in Innovation, and we had a grandmaster chess player who worked on the production line in the warehouse because he wanted a really monotonous job so that he could contemplate these epic, massive chess games, and he needed something like so each to their own. There's no judgment on what that thing might be. What is it you need to be buzzed up? And then once you know the things that are making you feel alive, well, what is that telling you? It could be something very different. Don't be constrained by what you thought in high school. I'm sure we're not in our 40s and 50s constrained with that, but I think sometimes society leads us down these rabbit holes of, you have to be a particular thing, you have to make a certain amount of money, you have to do this. I just spent my life savings on planting trees in sub-Saharan Africa. I don't have a pension right now because I just spent all the money on planting trees, because that was what was purposeful to me in this moment. And I'm prepared to work really, really hard to make up that gap, because I'm not constrained by needing everything I point towards to be about long-term finance and security. I think there's a lot of fear that drives staying inside some kind of invisible box that we put ourselves in.
Yeah.
So I suppose one question is to always say, well, take money off the table. If money wasn't the object, what would I do? What would bring me alive? What would make my heart sing and make me be the best version of myself? And then who do I know that can help me move towards that place?
Yeah.
Because they're for sure are relationships that you have. There are people that you know who can guide you, open doors for you, mentor you, buddy you, keep you honest so that you move towards that place.
And the opposite is true, right? It's true as well, because, you know, we do all have people in our lives that want us to stay exactly where we are. Thank you very much. And will encourage us to do so. So it's working out who the people are that are going to help us to get to that next place where we know we're going to be more fulfilled, more joyful, more alive. I love the best version of me. I've written it down. But I think you really hit the nail on the head there, that we all just want to be the best version of ourselves, don't we, at the end of the day? Yeah,
and you can feel the people who you talk to and you have more energy at the end of the conversation.
Absolutely, yeah.
Something about
I always have the best energy after I've spoken to you.
Tell you, little child, but I do with you as well, Yeshim. You know, there's been many times where you've asked me to do things and I thought, I don't really know what that's about, but because it's Yeshim, I'll back it, you know, because you have an innate sense of things. And don't be frightened of the more than, you don't have to intellectualize it necessarily. I think sometimes you can just think about places. So what I love about the sketching back through your life is it may be that you need to be more connected. You need to be in a place that is closer to a lake or the sea or mountains or hot weather or whatever it may be. There'll be things in there that are beyond human or, you know, that are important to you. So what are all of those ingredients and how can you pull them together? And then obviously you don't live in a complete vacuum. So how does that interrelate to the people that you're with? And, you know, and then hopefully you've got a supportive housemate, partner, sister, dog, who can help you on that journey and blow wind in your sails. Or best friend, definitely have a friend who you can really confide in. And I talked to my daughter about this. She's 10 a lot. We've been talking a lot about what is a true friend. And for me, it's someone who is always pleased for you when things are going right. There's no hint of jealousy, and who equally really cares when things aren't going your way, but will slightly will hold you when you're erring off doing what's best for you, you know, when you're erring away from choices that would allow you to be that best version of yourself. So those
everybody needs one of those in their lives, for sure.
And it may not be an obvious friend. It may not be like the people you grew up with. I've got plenty of mentors that I turn to who have different qualities, a bit like kind of pseudo godparents in my life, you know, people who you can bounce things off and they know some part of you. I think we have friends that relate to different facets of us. We're almost like little diamonds, aren't we? And you sort of know the friend that you would turn to given the challenge that you're facing.
Absolutely. Oh, I've so enjoyed hearing your story, and I hope other people will enjoy hearing it. I'm sure they will. And I want to thank you again, because your time is precious. You have a world to save. And I'm not saying that in a flippant way at all. I know that, you know, you are 100% dedicated to doing everything you can to make this world a better place. As cheesy as it might sound, I love your mission. So thank you so much for taking the time, and hopefully I'll get to see you in person really soon.
I look forward to it. Hope so too.
Take care.
Bye.